Deep under the ground, Red Prince and her sister Falling Grace followed the tunnel. Soon it led to an area that was definitely a part of the old fort. Carvings in the wall showed the flag of the Seven Cities with the late Emperor's seal, a man who had been dead for over 40 years. Falling Grace stuck close to Red, flying just parallel to where she was walking and letting the flashlight reveal the secrets on the walls. They listed it as part of Outpost 13, but the path only led one way forward, and the equipment of shovels, supports, and lights were all much more modern. The corporate name on the shovels said it belonged to Madrigal Inc., a corporation that fought to be a mixture of everything, despite international antitrust laws. They also had a corporate insignia of a sun surrounded by 8 crescent moons, which Red recognized also from the lights. They must have been the ones excavating the old fort. They got their start as geological surveyors during the Great War over a century ago, so it was logical they would do it here also. The path, however, led forward to a granite arch that had a familiar carving on it. Focusing the light on the carving, Red's hand shook when she saw what it was. The carving, that looked centuries old, depicted a knight with no helmet riding a horse. And though there was no color in the carving, Red was certain it was a white horse, and she was familiar with this minor arcana, the Knight of Swords. And the strangest part of the carving, it was cracked down the middle of the sigil. So, what was once contained within this cave was now free to leave. And though Red had not met any arcana at this point, she had remembered the tales from her Nama. Tales about how the witches of Astoria contained beings of great power in the forms of arcana cards and then hid the cards throughout the earth. Even minor arcana cards like the Knight of Swords were still powerful and dangerous. Symbolic of truth, action, and an unhesitant soul, the Knight of Swords was also able to create illusions, encourage impulsive choices, and create dangers for others. Clutching both her flashlight and her grimoire, Red Prince whispered to her sister, "Stay close to me. We don't know what's in there," while Falling Grace landed on her shoulder. Slowly entering under the arch, Red felt prickles across her skin, like she was about to be struck by lightning and she was just waiting for it to strike. The tunnel under the granite arch went forward about 7 meters before turning to the left. Following it led to a round chamber that was about 3 meters tall and wide enough that Red couldn't see the edges of the chamber. But she did see in the middle was a construction light pointing directly at a large granite slab with 3 objects on top. The ground just below the slab was marked with red spray paint, clearly meant to show that the objects weren't made to be touched. Approaching the slab, Red could see a very light red distortion in the air around the objects. The objects were cursed, and now close enough she could see what the objects were. On the left was a pair of stirrups. In the center of the slab was a helmet, and on the right, stabbed into the stone itself, was a sword that was still sharp despite being stabbed through stone. These objects clearly belonged to the Knight of Swords, but the question remained, where is the knight? "Where do you think the knight is?" Red asked Fallen Grace, who whispered back, "Behind you." Whipping around, Red turned to face Crystal Carla Campbell, but she looked very different this time. Her uniform from before was gone, and now she wore a robe with no sleeves, revealing that along her hands and arms were spades, tattoos that were once covered by her uniform. And on her face, there was a spade on both of her cheeks pointing up to her eyes, and on her forehead were spades pointing down at her eyes, with a spade on her nose pointing up. They looked like they were crudely made by herself, but the part that made Red pause was what was in her hand. An iron cage with spikes pointing inwards, and sitting down in the middle of the cage, hugging her knees and hiding her face, was Falling Grace. Glancing at Falling Grace at her shoulder, Red watched as she waved and then vanished. An illusion. Yes, I have your sister, Marceline. Yes, I know your name. So let's make this quick. Get me the knight's tools and I'll give you your sister back. At those words, Red felt rage fill her body. She was used to being threatened. She even expected it at her line of work. But threatening her sister was something else. Reaching into her jacket for her grimoire, Crystal lifted the cage to her face and held a knife to the fairy's face, the blade slipping through the bars of the cage. No grimoire, no magic, no tricks. Or else the little bitch gets it, Crystal warned Red, while Falling Grace sank more into her knees. This made Red pause as she felt her rage drain away from her, and she observed the situation. Falling Grace didn't even look hurt, and she was cowering in a cage, unable to even look at the knife. Red took a deep breath and then spoke. Why do you need me to grab the knight's tools? It's free for you to grab for yourself, Red asked, keeping both tension and emotion out of her voice. Crystal only responded with a laugh. You think I'm stupid? I know they're cursed to anyone who takes them. I know because you cursed them the last time you were here. Whoever takes the tools of the Knight of Swords will be cursed to be trapped. I've never been here before. Oh, I knew you were stupid, but I didn't think you were quite that stupid. Haven't you figured it out yet? The handwriting on the cards was yours. MGP, Marceline Genevieve Pierce. You're marking your own breadcrumbs, but you still missed the most important part. Crystal put her knife away to pull out 7 new spade cards from her pocket before putting them away again. I captured your sister as soon as you left her alone. You practically gift-wrapped her for me, leaving her in the room alone. I still don't get what you mean by I have been here before. If I was here, I'd remember. You really are dumb. That coin in the mail, it had a sigil to erase both you and your sister's memory of this place. You were here before, and you fought the Knight of Swords before, and you killed him, but his power can never die. Most of it's in his tools, but the rest of it found me. The power needed someone strong to control it, so it found me. And it told me how to do so much. How to keep the Isle foggy, how to create illusions that could be seen, heard, and touched, how to erase the minds of others. All I had to do was listen and feed it. Feed it? What are you feeding it? Yes, you cannot get something from nothing. Surely even you must know this much. All magic requires a sacrifice. Their minds were a good snack, but soon it needed all of them. And it isn't enough. It's never enough. I need the power in those tools, and you're the only one who can get them. So there, grab me those tools. I need your word, a promise that you'll release Fallen Grace safely after I get the tools for you. Are you serious? Yes. Fine. I promise, Crystal said, clearly not planning on keeping her word. But Red still approached the slab, examining the delicate red of the curse and reading it, understanding how it worked. It was familiar, even if it wasn't something she remembered. She knew how the curse worked, even if she didn't remember casting it, because she knew how she thought. It's not too late to do the right thing. You can stop here. We can still fix it all. Red pleaded with Crystal, who only laughed again. That won't work on me. Now, my sword. Please. Red sighed as she reached past the translucent red barrier and grabbed the sword, pulling it out of the stone as she examined the edge. Even after being stabbed through granite, it didn't dull at all, and Red could see her own reflection in the blade. But then she tossed it sword hilt first towards Crystal, who caught the sword with ease and admired the blade. Ah, yes. With this sword, I'll be able to smite my enemies, Crystal said to her own reflection. While Red was certain Crystal meant other people, she couldn't help but feel like Crystal was referring to herself. Crystal, please, just let it go. No. Give me my stirrups. Now. Red turned to the slab and picked up the stirrups. Holding the leather and metal, she examined it before tossing it to Crystal, who had set the cage down to hold the stirrups in her hand. If she was fascinated by the sword, then she was absolutely obsessed with the stirrups. With this, I will take the reins over fate. Red opened her mouth to speak again before she decided against it. Instead, she reached over and grabbed the helmet. It was warm, and even in her hand she could feel the power radiating off of it. Most of the essence of the Knight of Swords was in his helmet. Red wondered for a moment if that was why he normally didn't wear it, if the power was too much for him to wield. But before Red could warn Crystal, she was interrupted. Just put it on my head. Our deal? You'll get your sister when the helmet rests on my head. Red silently walked towards Crystal, who held the sword in her right hand and the stirrups in her left hand. Her eyes were only focused on the helmet in Red Prince's hands. You know, this power wasn't meant to be wielded by humans. The Astorian witches hid all the arcana for a reason. They knew how dangerous a single minor arcana could be. If they were ever all united, they would threaten all that is. I have to ask, please, just leave all the power down here to rot, like it was meant to. I don't care, bitch. All of the power will be mine. I will be a god. You know, most gods don't dress up like a Wonderland reject, Red said to her. Shut up. Put the helmet on my head, Crystal ordered. Red sighed and held the helmet in front of Crystal, and then lifted it over her head, careful to move her hair out of the way and setting the helmet on her head comfortably, even taking care to move hair out of the way of her eyes. I'm so sorry. Crystal ignored the Red Prince's apology to her. She was too busy focusing on herself in her own reflection. Narcissus had found his reflection, and Crystal had discovered her sword. With this helmet, I will have the wisdom to wield it all. Return my sister to me. She's right there, Crystal said, not bothering to look away from her own reflection. My actual sister. That's an illusion. Crystal briefly looked away from her reflection while she smiled. Well, looks like you're not completely stupid. She's by the entrance, Crystal said before going back to her reflection. Red turned, and sure enough, Fallen Grace was in a cage made out of the same strange metal as the grate in the floors above. And even now, she was trying to break herself out. Red approached the cage, and when she touched the lock, the cage opened. Before I take you with me, I need you to tell me something only you would know, Red asked Fallen Grace, who sighed before answering. You love bunnies so much, but you're severely allergic to their fur, Fallen Grace said before flying to Red's shoulder to sit on. She was indeed the real Fallen Grace. We'll be leaving now, Red said while stepping towards the exit, only to see it vanish, turning into a granite wall. Red whipped around to face Crystal, who was now no longer focused on her own reflection. Her hair floated like she was full of static charge. Her stirrups were hidden, and she held the sword in both hands, pointing it towards the Red Prince and the fallen Grace. I agreed to let her out of the cage. I didn't agree to let you both leave. I hunger, and I need to eat, Crystal said, licking her lips before raising her sword like she was about to strike. I am the Knight of Swords, and I will take what's mine, she yelled before she charged. Red ducked out of the way as the Knight of Swords laughed, slamming her sword hard into the ground. When the sword collided with the floor, walls of granite stone rose from the floor, connecting to the ceiling above. I'm going to get you, the Knight of Swords called out. Red took a deep breath and removed her phone. Fucking amateurs, Red scoffed as she turned her camera on and looked at the labyrinth through her phone. Sure enough, the illusion didn't extend as far as the camera. Illusions could be targeted towards people's minds, or it could be a projection, like light. Usually the best way for an illusion to work was to target people's minds, but that also left it vulnerable to third-party views, especially if the third party lacked a mind to fool, such as her phone's camera. And sure enough, the way out was not far, and although some of the walls were real, she could easily see a way out. She could also see the Knight of Swords hiding, and she was easy to avoid. Stepping through the illusions, Red exited the chamber and stood just beyond the arch, the sigil above now whole and no longer shattered. That didn't work, bitch. Want to try again? Fallen Grace called out. The Knight of Swords screeched like a banshee as she ran towards the exit, her sword drawn and ready to strike as her eyes were filled with murder, and she ran as fast as she could. And as soon as she reached the exit, though, she dropped to the ground in a heap, like she ran into a solid steel wall. What the fucking hell? The knight asked as she swung her sword at the invisible barrier. The sword stopped at the entrance, unable to break through the unseen barrier, not even making a clanging noise. Whatever was there stopping it, it wasn't physical. Why the fuck is this happening? The Knight of Swords demanded from the Red Prince and Fallen Grace. You didn't understand the curse. The curse didn't apply to those who took the knight's tools. The curse applied to those who possessed it. Crystal's eyes expanded under the knight's helmet as she choked out. No, 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 you're lying. You have to be lying. Whoever possesses these tools shall possess the power of the Knight of Swords. The one who possesses the power of the Knight of Swords is possessed by the Knight of Swords. The Knight of Swords shall remain possessed by the tomb of the living until it is possessed by another. The last time the Knight of Swords was released was because you gained possession of the Outpost Hotel and of his tomb, which released him. But now, there's no one to possess the Outpost Hotel. You're stuck here for the rest of time. No, 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 no. I'll let it go. I'll let it all go, Crystal said as her eyes were now filled with tears as she tried desperately to remove the helmet. But despite her grunting and screaming and crying, she couldn't remove the item. Even when she wrapped her fingers around it, she couldn't push her arms up to get it off. She then tried to drop the sword, but despite her best efforts, she couldn't remove her fingers from the hilt unless the sword was held by her other hand. Her tears only grew worse as this happened. No, 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 no. Why didn't you warn me about this? Crystal asked. I did. Red stared at Crystal, and then she spoke again. Speak. What do you want me to say? Crystal cried. Not you, Red clarified. For a moment, Crystal continued crying, before suddenly she froze, and her body stiffened before it straightened, and the true Knight of Swords stood up straight, staring at Red through Crystal's eyes.
So, we're here again. How long do you think you can keep me contained this time? 10 years? 5 years? A year? Do you honestly think you can hold me for even a day? I've gotten out before, and my brethren are searching for me even now. Do you honestly think you can handle the Hanged Man, the Empress? Hell, do you think you can handle the 13th Major Arcana?
Even here, in the dark and in his own prison cell, the Knight of Swords dared not to speak the name of the 13th Trump Arcana, and quite frankly, Red was terrified of it too. Red glanced at the Knight of Swords, and instead of answering his question, she asked her own. The Knight of Swords was a lot of things, but he wasn't someone who lied, at least when asked a direct question. Who was the woman who led me down here? The Knight of Swords shook Crystal's head. Despite the simple action, Red and Fallen Grace could hear the snaps of tense muscles and bones being moved in ways they were never made to be moved.
There is no one on this island, except for who's here, and nobody.
Nobody's here? Fallen Grace was shaking on Red's shoulder as the Knight of Swords smiled, turning Crystal's face into a nightmarish scarecrow as the minor arcana began to laugh.
Not anymore. Someone let them go,
He said ominously. The Red Prince turned away from him to begin her walk to the office. There was a lot of file digging that would have to be done. Families that would have to be called and then informed that their loved ones were no longer alive. The Red Prince knew that there was no other useful information that was going to be pulled from the Knight of Swords. Facing away from the knight, she heard Crystal gasp. Wait, her voice called out. Please, leave the flashlight. My light here won't last long. I don't want to be alone in the dark. Crystal's voice pleaded. But Red could hear it in her voice. The subtle smirk. The Knight of Swords was trying to get under her skin, reminding Red of another person she couldn't save, who was left under a curse worse than death. It's the least you can do for us, Mark, the voice now said, sounding like her father and mother speaking together. Red felt her rage rise, and the energy from before tingled from her fingertips and spread through her entire body. Every breath, every heartbeat, and every moving cell in her body only increased its power and increased her rage. Her first instinct was to strike at the knight with this power, but then she felt the tingle ease, and her logical mind took over again. The Knight of Swords wanted her to lash out. It was one of the things that he was good at, making people do rash actions. He was depending on her to break the sigil herself and let him go. She would have to be the bigger person, and as much as she hurt, she knew that hurting him would only hurt others even more. Letting out a long sigh, Marceline turned off the flashlight and did something to the flashlight before holding it up. Falling Grace, please, take this to the prisoner. Just toss it in. Marceline asked her sister. Sister, why are you doing this? Falling Grace asked, confused. Just Trust me, the Red Prince answered. Fallen Grace nodded and grabbed the flashlight, flying closer to the threshold before tossing it inside. Ah, such a good boy, Honorous Augustus. The Knight of Swords spoke in a voice that Red didn't recognize, but she could tell made Fallen Grace incredibly pissed off. Reaching behind her, she grabbed Fallen Grace and spoke aloud. He's trying to bait you. You're better than him, and you know that. Just get me out of here, Fallen Grace said, holding both of her hands up in a rude gesture, as the Red Prince walked away, guided by the light of her phone. Not long after they left, the Knight of Swords chuckled to himself before pressing the button on the flashlight. But instead of a light, nothing happened. Lifting the flashlight up close to his eyes in the dying light of the construction light in the chamber, there he saw the flashlight had no light bulb, leaving him alone in the dark. When he screamed, he only had nobody for company. When Red made it to the surface, she saw for the first time on this island the sun. Outpost Isle was indeed beautiful, if not for the dead grass everywhere and the rats and crabs now scrambling to hide from the sun's harsh glare. But something else she saw on the surface was hundreds of people. They were all pale and they looked half-starved, but they were all staring out at the ocean. Now free from the influence of the Knight of Swords, the zombie were all now free to see the ocean, curing their affliction. The sacrifices were now no longer sacrificed. Red stared out over the crowd, all looking away from her. She would still have a lot of work ahead of her, contacting the families of those who are missing for weeks or even months. But at least she would give the families something even better than closure. Still, though, the victory felt bittersweet. Fallen Grace, seeing Red's disappointment, whispered into her ear, "You gave her multiple chances to stop. She chose possession and power over freedom and choice. Now her power chose to possess her. If there's a way to free her without freeing the Knight of Swords, you know we'll figure it out. He got to me too, you know. Especially when he spoke in my father's voice, and that name, I abandoned it for a reason, and you know that," Fallen Grace said sadly. Red responded by gently rubbing Fallen Grace's tears away from her cheek with just her fingertip. "Well, come on now. We have a lot of work to do. And how are we getting paid?"